Perfect. Okay. So we'd had some people ask about the applicability of the TEACH Act in our remote teaching and learning environments. So I'm just going to kind of go through with everybody today a little bit about the TEACH Act and hopefully give you some information about when it comes in handy, when we can apply it, and then we'll kind of work through a couple of scenarios to just hopefully walk everybody through how it looks in practice. So if you have questions as we're going, please, like Peter said, raise your hand and let us know. But just as kind of an introduction, most of you are probably familiar with the fact that when we have teaching done face-to-face, we have pretty broad exemptions in the law for instructors to perform and display materials in that face-to-face classroom setting. That's, as you can see here, section 110(1) of the copyright statute. When we get into a remote teaching, online education setting, we are no longer covered by that face-to-face teaching exemption. We're in section 110(2) of the copyright statute. That's called the TEACH Act, which is the Technology, Education, and Copyright Harmonization Act. It was Congress's attempt at bringing some of the rights granted in the face-to-face teaching into an online setting. So we're going to go through, this comes into play when we have content that's not in the public domain, content that we have not obtained a license for, in the same ways often that when we rely on the face-to-face teaching exemption or when we're looking at fair use as our exemption. TEACH is just another exemption that can come in handy in a remote teaching setting. So at a glance, TEACH Act is not applicable to works that are designed to be used in an online teaching setting. So if you have materials that's what they have been designed to do, is to be used in that setting, TEACH is not going to be applicable to the use of those materials. And the TEACH Act is only related to the performance and the display right. So you're probably all very familiar with the 6 exclusive rights of the copyright holder, reproduction, adaptation, distribution, public performance, public display. I'm missing one. Peter, Heidi, which one am I missing?
Digital audio transmission.
Thank you, digital audio transmissions. So the TEACH Act doesn't cover every one of those rights. It just covers the performance and the display of a work. So when we're thinking about that, TEACH allows you to perform, an instructor to perform a non-dramatic literary or non-dramatic musical work. Non-dramatic literary works are things like poems, short stories, musical works. Non-dramatic musical works are going to be things like popular music. Examples of dramatic musical works are going to be things like operas, musicals, music videos. And so TEACH allows for the performance in its entirety of non-dramatic literary or non-dramatic musical works. It also covers the performance of any other work. So if you have a situation where you want to perform a musical or an opera or a music video, those performances can be covered under TEACH, but only in reasonable and limited portions. So that's the distinction there. One type of work is allowed to be performed in its entirety. Everything else is just restricted to reasonable and limited portions. And then TEACH allows for the display of a work in an amount comparable to what would be displayed in a typical face-to-face class. So if the instructor is just holding up an image or something that would be displayed like it would be in a face-to-face class, TEACH will potentially cover those displays. So TEACH has a series of requirements that must be met in order to have coverage under the Act. And we typically will break this out into 3 separate sections. So there are requirements that typically an instructor will be responsible for, requirements that our IT people will typically be responsible for, and then requirements that the Copyright Office that we can help you with when you're looking at using TEACH. So first is kind of the instructor portion, what they're responsible for. And so they need to confirm various attributes regarding the type of work they're transmitting. So they need to confirm that they're transmitting a performance, of either a non-dramatic literary or non-dramatic musical work, in which case, again, they can perform them in their entirety, or they need to confirm that they're performing a dramatic work or any other type of work, in which case they're limited in reasonable portions. And then let me make sure or they can say that, or they can confirm that they are displaying a work in an amount comparable to what they would be doing in a face-to-face class. So that's the type of work they're transmitting. And again, it's limited to either a performance or display. And then the source status, so the nature of the copyrighted work. Again, they're needing to confirm that the work was legally obtained, that they have an authorized copy of the work, and that it's not the type of work that's being created to be used in an online educational setting. So then we will move on to the IT people, I believe. Michaela, is the next slide. Yes, so our IT people will also need to confirm a series of requirements. This will depend, their confirmation is going to depend on the distribution channel for the material. So if the instructor is uploading through Learning Suite or Canvas, those are platforms that we encourage because they limit access to just the students who are enrolled in the course. If things are being uploaded just openly on the web to YouTube or other public platforms, we don't recommend that. It will not bring you into compliance with Teach. So if you're trying to rely on Teach, you don't want to be uploading to public platforms. So our IT people are going to just confirm that we have technological measures in place that limit the access. We encourage, when it comes to the distribution channels for remote learning, we encourage uploading through some sort of LMS like Learning Suite or Canvas that limits access to just the students who are enrolled in the course. Part of Teach is that we do limit the access to the materials to just those students who are enrolled. And so our IT people are going to confirm that we have those types of limitations in place, that we are limiting access and retention, the ability for students to retain the information, and that we are not circumventing technological measures that have been put on by a copyright holder to control access to their work. So things like ripping DVDs or music or those types of things, they're circumventing. So we want, our IT people are going to confirm that we're not engaging in those types of activities. And that when we're storing content on our servers, that access is limited to the students enrolled in the course. So there are these technological aspects of Teach that require, limiting the access as much as possible to the students who are enrolled in the course. And that's going to be typically going to be confirmed by our IT people. Would just be, the typical standard kind of policies in place by IT at the university. And then finally, there's a piece that our office will play in the Teach Act in certifying, compliance, that we are an accredited, nonprofit educational institution. The Teach Act only applies to those types of entities. The Teach Act requires that we as an institution have copyright policies in place and that we have made those policies available to our students and faculty. And that there's an education component that we're making our community aware of these copyright policies, that there's copyright notices included with the course content, letting students know that the materials are subject to copyright protection. And then again, just working with the instructors or with, in my case, with continuing education to make sure that we have this limitation to of access to materials to the students who are enrolled in the course. And so these are all, pieces of the Teach Act puzzle that you have to make sure that there's compliance with each area in order to be able to get coverage under the Teach Act. So we've created this Teach Act requirements checklist, and we will make it available to you through our website, but it just basically breaks down each section and what each group is generally which responsibilities fall where. And if you have questions, you can reach out to our office, but this just breaks down what I've kind of been explaining to you about the Teach Act and about the steps that are necessary for compliance. So we're going to go through just a couple of scenarios to try to hopefully demonstrate how the Teach Act works in practice and will apply as we have instructors who are looking to use the exemption. So the first one you can see here, if an instructor wants to digitally distribute copies of a copyrighted reading to students through Learning Suite, does the Teach Act apply in this situation? The Teach Act only applies to the performance or display rights. So the distribution, the reproduction, those are not covered by the Teach Act. So in this situation, the instructor would not rely on the Teach Act. They would need to look at either fair use or look at other options. So if we have a music instructor who wants to digitally perform songs by Bob Dylan, Emmylou Harris, and Brandi Carlile to help students understand the evolution of Americana music, would the Teach Act cover this proposed use? So the instructor would be able to perform these songs in their entirety if they chose to do so, because it's integral to the teaching objectives of the class, and these are non-dramatic musical works. And so they would be just fine to play those songs digitally for the class. So the next one, you can see here, an art history instructor wants to record his lectures in which he displays a series of copyrighted works in an amount comparable to a live class. The instructor wants to post the lectures on YouTube. Would the Teach Act cover this proposed use? Yeah, so if this same scenario, if the instructor was, doing this lecture in a password protected LMS, so if it was being distributed through Learning Suite or Canvas or something like that, this same display would be covered by the Teach Act. But because the instructor is not limiting that access to just the enrolled students, they're not able to have protection under the Teach Act. So this last one, if we have a history professor who wants to digitally perform 2 songs from the musical Hamilton to help students learn about historic events, would the Teach Act cover this proposed use? This might be a candidate for fair use. If you remember back, potentially the Teach Act would cover this use, but only in limited and reasonable portions. So if the instructor wanted to use the songs in their entirety, we'd have to probably look at fair use for that. But under the Teach Act, because they're dramatic works, they would be limited, the instructor would be limited to performing limited and reasonable portions of the songs.